I thought marriage was about building a future together. For years, I stood by my wife through every struggle, believing loyalty meant something. Then, overnight, everything changed. She inherited more than $10 million from a relative I barely knew existed. Within weeks, she shoved divorce papers into my hands and told me to get out of the house we built together. I wasn't just blindsided, I was erased. What followed was a battle I never expected to fight, and one I couldn't afford to lose. When I first married her, life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We had a small two-bedroom house that always smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. The floors creaked in the winter, the roof leaked when it rained too hard, and we were forever chasing bills, but we were a team. Or at least, that's what I thought. I worked long hours at a job that never paid quite enough, and she kept our lives organized. We weren't rich, but we had plans. Vacations we would take someday. Kids we might raise. A future that felt real because we were building it together, one late bill and one small win at a time. She used to look at me and say, "We'll laugh about this one day." And I believed her. There were nights when she came home defeated from work, face pale from stress. I held her, told her it would pass, and reminded her of our shared dreams. I thought that's what marriage was, holding each other up when life tried to knock us down. She didn't have to ask. I was always there. So when the inheritance news hit, I was the first to celebrate with her. $10 million. $10 million. I couldn't wrap my head around it. A distant relative passed away, someone I had met maybe once at a family barbecue years ago. Suddenly, she was the heir to a fortune neither of us had ever imagined. My first thought wasn't about luxury cars or vacations. It was relief. Relief that we could finally breathe, that she wouldn't have to stress over bills, that maybe we could fix the roof and take the kind of vacation we always joked about. But something shifted. It wasn't immediate, not like a switch being flipped, but I felt it in the small details. The way she answered my questions with clipped words. The way her phone suddenly became an extension of her hand, full of conversations with lawyers and accountants I wasn't part of. She started dressing differently, speaking differently, like she was rehearsing for a life that no longer included me. At first, I ignored it. Told myself it was stress, adjustment, the weight of responsibility that comes with that much money. She was overwhelmed, that was all. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew better. It wasn't stress, it was distance. Still, I stayed patient. I thought if I just kept showing up, kept being steady, she'd remember who stood by her before all this. I thought love was enough. I didn't know it then, but the creaking floors, the late bills, even the leaky roof, those were never the problems. The real problem was the moment she realized she no longer needed me. And soon, she was going to make sure I understood that in the cruelest way possible. Little did I know, everything was about to change. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I came home from work, exhausted from another 12-hour shift, and found her at the dining table, laptop open, papers spread everywhere. Normally, she would have looked up, smiled, maybe asked about my day. But that night, she didn't even acknowledge me. I stood there for a moment, watching her scroll through emails, her expression tight. The room felt colder than usual, though the heater hummed in the background. I finally cleared my throat. "Everything okay?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Just busy." Her tone was clipped, the kind of voice you use with a stranger in line, not with your husband. I tried again. "Do you need help with anything?" "No," she said flatly. Then, almost as an afterthought, "This is complicated. You wouldn't understand." The word stung. You wouldn't understand. I wanted to push back, remind her I'd been there for every crisis, every mess we cleaned up together. But something about the way she said it, dismissive and absolute, stopped me cold. That night, I noticed she'd set up a separate bank account. A glossy envelope from the bank sat on the counter, her name embossed on the welcome packet. No joint account, no discussion, just hers. I picked it up, turned it over, waiting for an explanation. She snatched it from my hand before I could ask. "Don't go through my things," she snapped. I laughed nervously, trying to defuse the tension. I wasn't going through anything. It was just sitting there. She shot me a look I'd never seen before, sharp, guarded, almost hostile. "Well, don't." The air between us thickened. I wanted to tell her how wrong it felt, how foreign her behavior was, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I went to bed early, lying awake while she stayed downstairs. I heard the clicking of her keyboard until long past midnight. In the days that followed, the distance grew. She started taking calls in the backyard, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and urgent. If I stepped outside, she'd end the conversation abruptly. She began scheduling dinners with advisors I'd never met, always alone. Then came the night that changed everything. I walked into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, flipping through a folder. The papers inside weren't bank statements or investment reports. They were legal documents. I froze when I caught the heading on the first page, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. My stomach dropped. For a second, I convinced myself I'd misread it. Divorce? No. We argued sometimes, sure, but divorce? That wasn't us. She looked up and caught me staring. Instead of hiding it, she calmly closed the folder, set it on the coffee table, and crossed her arms. I was going to tell you soon, she said, her tone almost casual. But since you've already seen it, yes. I've spoken to a lawyer. My mouth went dry. A lawyer? For what? For this, she replied, tapping the folder. It's better if we separate. Things are different now. Different. That word echoed in my skull like a gunshot. $10 million in her name. And suddenly, I was just different. Disposable. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I managed was a broken whisper. Are you serious? She didn't flinch. Completely. That was the night I realized I wasn't living in the same marriage anymore. But it was only the beginning of my nightmare. The morning after she dropped the bomb, I walked into the kitchen half hoping it had been a nightmare. Maybe I'd imagined the cold folder on the table, the way she'd said different, like it was a death sentence. But there it was again, the folder, sitting neatly by the coffee pot as if it belonged among mugs and sugar packets. She moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened, pouring herself coffee, checking her phone, humming under her breath. Not once did her eyes meet mine. I wanted to snatch the folder, tear it apart, demand answers. But instead, I just watched her sip her drink, calm and collected. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. That scared me more than anything. Later that day, while she was out meeting with an advisor, I went into the study. Papers were everywhere, scattered across the desk. She never used to be careless, but maybe she thought I wouldn't dare touch them now. That was her mistake. The first document I picked up was a draft of a property division list. My name wasn't on half the things we'd bought together. Furniture I paid for. The car I drove to work every day. Even the house, listed entirely under her column. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. My chest tightened as I shuffled through more papers. There were copies of emails printed out, correspondence with her attorney. Words like expedite process and ensure minimal claims from spouse jumped out at me. Spouse. That was me. Reduced to a legal obstacle, an item to be minimized. I should have stopped there, but I couldn't. I opened her laptop, still logged in, and found a folder marked personal. Inside were scanned documents, her new bank statements, private agreements with financial managers, even a draft prenup she must have been considering before all this. Every file was a reminder. She'd been planning to cut me out, piece by piece, long before she said the words out loud. My hands trembled as I clicked through. Part of me screamed that I was invading her privacy, crossing a line. But another part knew the truth. Privacy didn't exist anymore. She'd already decided I didn't belong. That night, I tried to confront her. I saw what you've been working on, I said, my voice shaking. She didn't even blink. Then you know where we stand. You're trying to erase me, I said, barely able to get the words out. Her expression didn't change. Don't be dramatic. It's just business. Just business. The phrase made my skin crawl. Our marriage, our home, our life, reduced to business. I wanted to believe there was some part of her that still cared, that maybe she was just overwhelmed and scared. But the look in her eyes told me otherwise. Cold, distant, calculated. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach, unable to sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a countdown clock. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't hesitating. She was moving forward, step by step, and I was already behind. What I didn't realize at the time was that the papers I'd seen were only the surface. The truth underneath was far worse, and it was about to cost me more than I ever imagined. 2 weeks after I first saw the divorce papers, I walked through the front door and felt the shift immediately. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, she left the TV on or music playing from her phone. That night, nothing. Just silence, heavy and deliberate. I found her in the living room, calmly sorting through boxes. Not cardboard moving boxes, storage bins. Our storage bins. The ones we kept in the attic, filled with photo albums, old letters, keepsakes from vacations. She was going through them with surgical precision, pulling out the things that belonged to her family, setting them aside, and leaving the rest in a messy pile. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't even look at me. "Organizing. We need to be prepared when the separation is finalized." The word finalized made my stomach twist. "Separation? You mean divorce?" "Yes," she said, calm as ever. "It's happening. The papers are already in motion." I stood frozen as she closed one album, tucked it neatly into a bin, and taped the lid shut. "You're serious," I whispered. She finally looked at me, and her expression was colder than I'd ever seen. "Of course I'm serious. I've been serious for months. You just didn't notice." Her words hit harder than any punch. Months. She'd been planning this, rehearsing it, while I thought we were still building a life. I felt something inside me crack. I reached for the nearest photo album, one filled with pictures from our early years, our first road trip, the tiny apartment we painted together, the Christmas tree we decorated with mismatched ornaments. "These mean nothing to you?" I asked. My voice broke halfway through. She glanced at the album, then back at me. "Memories don't pay the bills. They don't build the future." I stared at her, speechless. That was when I noticed the thick envelope on the coffee table. My name was printed neatly across the front. Hands trembling, I picked it up and slid the documents out. Inside was the official notice from her attorney. She was filing for divorce, claiming the house as her sole property, and offering me a settlement that was insultingly small. It wasn't even enough to cover 6 months of rent. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, flipping through page after page. Her voice was steady. "It's generous, considering you'll be fine on your own. This is cleaner. Faster. Generous. Cleaner. Faster." Every word felt like a knife. She wasn't just ending our marriage. She was erasing me from the equation, reducing me to a liability she wanted off the books. I dropped the papers back on the table, my chest heaving. After everything we've been through? After everything I've given? She cut me off sharply. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll thank me later." For the first time, I realized there was no negotiation, no hesitation. She was already gone. Her eyes didn't hold love, or regret, or even anger. Just certainty. I stumbled out of the room, clutching the envelope, my mind racing. It was undeniable now. She wasn't bluffing, wasn't testing boundaries. She had already built a future where I didn't exist, and the proof was sitting in my hands. I couldn't shake the weight of that envelope. I carried it with me like a stone in my chest, flipping through the pages over and over, hoping I'd misread something. But no matter how many times I scanned the fine print, the message was the same. She wanted everything. The house, the savings, even the furniture we'd bought together on credit. All I was entitled to was a payout so small it felt like an insult, a tip for a job half done. At first, I thought it was just her coldness driving it. Maybe greed had consumed her. Maybe the money warped her sense of fairness. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just her. This was orchestrated. One night, when she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, I scrolled through her emails again. What I found made my blood run cold. Threads of correspondence between her and her attorney stretched back months, long before I even knew about the inheritance. Subject lines like asset protection strategy and spousal claim minimization jumped out at me. Each email read like a playbook for dismantling my life. In one message, her lawyer suggested transferring certain assets into a trust to keep them untouchable. In another, there was talk of reclassifying funds as separate property, even though they'd been deposited after she inherited the money. It wasn't just divorce, it was a hostile takeover. And there it was, written plainly in black and white. Ensure minimal liability to husband. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was liability. The shock of it hit harder than the papers themselves. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. This was deliberate, calculated, and months in the making. While I thought we were still a team, she'd been sitting in lawyers' offices plotting how to erase me. The next day, the illusion shattered further. I got a call from our bank about an account I hadn't even known existed. My name had been quietly removed as an authorized user. Credit cards in both our names were suddenly flagged, balances transferred. It was like watching sand slip through my fingers. Everything I thought was secure evaporating in real time. I confronted her that evening. My voice was shaking, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. You've been planning this for months. You cut me out of accounts. You hired lawyers behind my back, you. She didn't even let me finish. Of course I planned it. Did you think I'd wait around and let you take half of what isn't yours? The venom in her voice stunned me. What isn't yours? I wanted to remind her of the years we spent scraping together money, the sacrifices I made so she could chase opportunities, the roof over our heads I fought to keep when bills piled up. But the words stuck in my throat. She wasn't listening. She had already rewritten the story in her head. That night, lying awake, I realized this was no longer about a broken marriage. This was a war, and she'd already drawn up the battle plans. I wasn't just fighting for love or dignity anymore. I was fighting for survival. And the more I uncovered, the more certain I became. This went so much deeper than I ever thought. The weight of her betrayal pressed on me day and night. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her calm face as she told me I was a liability. Not a husband, not a partner, a liability. For days, I drifted through the house like a ghost, surrounded by walls that no longer felt like mine. My hands would linger on the picture frames we'd hung together, the couch we'd saved for months to buy, the chipped mugs we laughed about never replacing. She wanted to strip all of it away from me, reduce me to a stranger with nothing but memories. Part of me wanted to give up, sign the papers, walk away with whatever scraps she threw at me, start over, rebuild somewhere else, leave the battlefield she'd turned our home into. Maybe it would hurt less if I stopped fighting. Maybe peace was worth more than possessions. But another part of me, the part that had swallowed every sacrifice, every long shift, every compromise for her sake, screamed that walking away would mean erasing myself. It would mean letting her rewrite history, casting me as the disposable husband she could discard the moment fortune smiled on her. I sat at the kitchen table one night, staring at the settlement offer. The numbers were obscene, not because they were generous, but because they were insulting. The payout wouldn't even cover rent in a one-bedroom apartment for a year. And in her notes to her lawyer, I'd seen the phrase, expedite eviction process. Eviction. From my own home. I gripped the pen in my hand, tempted to scrawl my name on the dotted line just to end it all. My chest felt tight, my vision blurry with exhaustion. But then I remembered something her lawyer had written in one of those emails. Ensure minimal liability to husband. Minimal liability. That's all I was to her now. If I signed, I'd be proving them right. So I forced myself to think. Really think. I pulled out a notepad and started listing everything I knew. The dates, the documents, the emails I'd seen. Every inconsistency. Every detail that suggested she wasn't just cutting me out, but actively hiding assets. My hand shook as I wrote. But the more I put down, the more my fear turned into something else, resolve. I didn't have her resources. I didn't have a team of lawyers. But I had the truth. And maybe, just maybe, I had enough to fight back. The idea scared me as much as it thrilled me. Court battles weren't clean. They weren't easy. They dragged on for months, sometimes years, draining the very soul of the people caught in them. But what was the alternative? To let her erase me? To accept the role of liability and disappear quietly? I looked around the house, our house, and felt my jaw tighten. No, not quietly. Not like this. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, not peacefully, but with a flicker of purpose. Because in the war she'd started, I was finally preparing to fight back. And soon, she would realize I wasn't as disposable as she thought. The next morning, I forced myself out of bed, shaved, and put on the one suit I still had that didn't look worn down. My hands trembled as I tightened the knot in my tie. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. If I was going to fight, I needed to look like a man who still had dignity left. I drove across town to a law office recommended by an old coworker. The place was nothing like the sleek firm my wife used. No glass walls or polished marble floors. Just a modest building with faded carpet and a receptionist who looked like she'd been there for decades. But something about it felt right. Less like a business, more like a place where battles were quietly won. When I sat across from the attorney, a graying man named Harris, I unloaded everything. The inheritance, the sudden bank accounts, the hidden documents, the settlement offer that was more insult than compromise. He listened without interruption, jotting notes, occasionally nodding with that calm expression lawyers seem to perfect. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You've got more leverage than you think," he said. I blinked. What do you mean? She can't just erase you. You've been married for years. Depending on state law, you may be entitled to a substantial portion, even if the inheritance itself is separate property. The way she's transferring assets and hiding funds, that's not just unethical, it's potentially illegal. The words hit me like a surge of adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning. So I can fight this. He nodded. You can, but you need to be prepared. This won't be quick or painless. People with that kind of money play hardball. She'll try to intimidate you, drag things out, bleed you dry. But if you're committed, we can fight back. I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. I've got nothing left to lose. Harris gave me a thin smile. Then we start by gathering everything you've seen. Emails, documents, bank notices. The more evidence we have, the stronger your case. For the next 2 hours, I laid it all out. Every note I'd scribbled, every detail I remembered. By the time I left, I had a folder in my hands and something even more valuable, a plan. Driving home, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe I wasn't just a liability. For once, the future didn't look like a straight line to defeat. That night, I even allowed myself a small smile when she noticed the papers I carried under my arm. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the first crack in her confidence. She knew. She knew I wasn't going to roll over. For a moment, I thought the tide had turned. I thought I had finally regained some ground. But what I didn't realize then was that this was just the opening move. And in the kind of game she was playing, false victories were traps in disguise. I thought it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. It didn't take long for her to make her move. Barely a week after I'd met with Harris, I came home to find a thick envelope wedged in the doorframe. Certified mail. My stomach sank as I ripped it open. Inside was a motion filed by her attorney, not just to expedite the divorce, but to request a temporary order of exclusive occupancy. In plain English, she wanted me out of the house. Immediately, I read the words over and over, my hands shaking. According to the motion, the house was her sole property, and my continued presence created emotional distress that interfered with her well-being. The legal jargon was designed to sting less, but the meaning was brutal. She was painting me as an intruder in my own home. When I showed the documents to Harris the next morning, he sighed heavily. This is classic. They're trying to push you out early, make you lose footing before we even get to division of assets. If you're not in the house, it becomes easier for them to argue it isn't really yours. But I've been paying the mortgage for years, I argued, my voice cracking. I know, he said, and we'll prove it. But you need to be ready. They're playing aggressive. Aggressive was an understatement. Within days, I started getting calls from creditors about joint accounts I hadn't touched in months. Turns out, she'd run up charges, then quietly shifted responsibility onto me. My credit score plummeted almost overnight. Everything felt like a deliberate punch. Then came the social side. Friends we'd known for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. At first, I thought they were just uncomfortable, caught in the middle. But then one old friend finally admitted the truth. She'd been telling people I was unstable, bitter, even harassing her. Harassing. The word nearly knocked the wind out of me. I'd bent over backward to avoid conflict, swallowing my anger just to keep things from exploding. And now she was spinning it into a narrative where I was the aggressor. The walls were closing in. I felt it every time I walked into the house and saw her cool, unbothered expression. She moved around as if she'd already won, speaking to me only in clipped phrases, like a landlord waiting for a tenant to vacate. One night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the motion for occupancy in my hands. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. Tired eyes, unshaven face, a man shrinking by the day. I could almost hear her voice calling me what she truly believed, liability. But then I thought of the folder Harris had given me, the notes we'd compiled, the evidence I'd gathered. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. Still, the reality was clear. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting to erase me entirely, socially, legally, financially. And if I didn't push back harder, she might succeed. What happened next made me question everything I thought I knew about how far she was willing to go. The day of the hearing for her occupancy motion felt like walking to my own execution. I sat at the defendant's table, hands clammy, eyes fixed on the polished wood as her attorney painted me as a threat. Not violent. No, they were too clever for that. Instead, I was described as unstable, uncooperative, and resistant to transition. Words designed to make me sound unreasonable, someone who couldn't accept reality. She sat across the courtroom, immaculate in a tailored suit, her hair pulled back, her face a mask of calm determination. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her performance too. She looked like the responsible one, the victim of a husband who just wouldn't let go. When it was Harris's turn to argue, he did his best. He laid out the years I'd contributed to the mortgage, the proof that the house wasn't solely hers, the sudden financial transfers that suggested she was hiding assets. But I could feel the tide in the room. The judge didn't outright dismiss us, but his questions carried skepticism, his expression a quiet warning. By the end, the ruling was delivered, temporary occupancy granted, to her. I had 30 days to vacate. The words hit like a gavel slamming straight into my chest. 30 days. 30 days to pack up a life I'd spent years building, to walk away from the only home that still felt like mine. She didn't even glance in my direction as the order was read. To her, this was just another step in the process, a box checked on her lawyer's list. I stumbled out of the courtroom in a haze. Harris tried to reassure me. This is temporary. We'll appeal. This isn't the end. But his voice felt distant, like an echo underwater. None of it mattered in that moment. All I could think about was how easily she'd pushed me out, how quickly the system had stamped me with the word disposable. The weeks that followed were a blur of cardboard boxes and empty nights. Friends I reached out to avoided me. Some didn't answer at all. Others gave short, uncomfortable excuses. Her story, the one where I was bitter, unstable, clinging, had spread farther than I realized. I was losing not just my home, but my reputation. One evening, I sat on the bare floor of what used to be our bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes. My chest felt hollow, my hands numb. For the first time, I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was fighting a war I couldn't win. Maybe I should just sign the papers, accept whatever crumbs she offered, and disappear quietly. Tears blurred my vision, hot and unwelcome. I hadn't cried in years, not like this. But in that moment, I felt stripped of everything. Dignity, stability, even identity. I wasn't her husband anymore. I wasn't even a man with a home. I was just a liability, exactly as she'd labeled me. But as I sat there in the silence, something inside me shifted. The despair was still there, heavy and suffocating. Yet beneath it, a spark flickered. A realization. If she was willing to go this far, if she was willing to lie and manipulate to erase me, then I had nothing left to lose by fighting back with everything I had. That night, at my lowest point, I made a decision. I realized what I had to do to end this once and for all. The final hearing felt different from the others. This time, I wasn't walking in with my shoulders slumped, waiting to be gutted. I had evidence. Harris and I had spent weeks combing through every scrap of paper, every bank statement, every email I'd managed to copy before she locked me out of the accounts. What we built wasn't just a defense, it was a weapon. As we entered the courtroom, I caught her eye. She was confident, almost smug, flanked by her high-powered attorneys in their pristine suits. She probably thought this would be the day she buried me for good. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of her. The judge called the session to order, and her side went first. Her lawyer painted the usual picture. Devoted wife, suddenly burdened by wealth, unfairly harassed by an unreasonable husband who refused to let go. It was polished, convincing, almost theatrical. But I noticed something in her demeanor. She wasn't watching the judge. She was watching me, waiting for me to flinch. When it was our turn, Harris rose slowly, papers in hand. "Your Honor," he began, "the story you've heard is carefully crafted, but it isn't the truth. The truth is that my client was systematically erased from his marriage, his home, and his financial future, not by chance, but by deliberate deception." He laid out the evidence piece by piece. The hidden bank accounts, the trust transfers made only days after the inheritance, the email chain where her attorney explicitly discussed minimizing spousal claims. Every document projected onto the courtroom screen, every phrase highlighted in glaring yellow. Then came the bombshell. Harris handed the judge a copy of a draft prenup she had circulated months before the inheritance, one that classified nearly all assets as separate property. It was unsigned, but damning nonetheless. Proof that she'd been plotting her escape long before any of this began. Her attorneys scrambled. They objected, argued technicalities, tried to dismiss the documents as irrelevant. But the judge wasn't buying it. He leaned forward, brow furrowed, eyes fixed on her. Mrs. _____, he said slowly. You claim this separation is about fairness. But these documents suggest premeditation and deliberate attempts to obscure marital assets. That goes directly against the principles of equitable division. For the first time, I saw her confidence falter. A flicker of panic crossed her face as she whispered furiously to her lawyers. Harris pressed on. My client is not asking for more than his fair share. He is simply asking that the years of contribution, sacrifice, and shared labor not be dismissed as worthless. The opposing side would have you believe he is a liability. In reality, he was the foundation. Without him, there would be no home to divide, no stability that allowed his wife to pursue her ambitions. He is not disposable. He is entitled. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even the bailiff shifted in his seat. When the ruling finally came, it was like air rushing back into my lungs. The judge denied her motion to classify the home and shared assets as solely hers. He ordered a full financial review of the inheritance transfers and granted me legal rights to half of all marital property, plus spousal support pending final division. Her face hardened like stone, but her eyes gave her away: shock, fury, disbelief. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I sat there, heart pounding, barely able to breathe. After months of being erased, vilified, and pushed aside, I had finally been heard. Finally, justice wasn't just a word in a lawyer's mouth. It was mine. When the gavel came down for the last time, it didn't feel like triumph, not at first. It felt like exhaustion. Months of sleepless nights, empty rooms, whispered rumors, and cold courtrooms had worn me down to the bone. Walking out of that courthouse, folder in hand, I wasn't celebrating. I was breathing. For the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe. The ruling didn't make me rich. I didn't walk away with $10 million, nor did I expect to. What I got was fair recognition that my years of sacrifice mattered, that I wasn't some liability to be discarded. The judge's decision granted me my share of marital property, compensation for the years I carried the weight, and protection from the financial traps she and her attorneys tried to spring on me. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to rebuild. Leaving the house for the last time was harder than I'd imagined. Every wall, every creak of the floor held echoes of who we used to be. I packed the last of my boxes into a borrowed truck, stood in the doorway for a long moment, and whispered goodbye to a home that had been stolen from me long before the papers said so. Then I closed the door and didn't look back. The hardest part wasn't the material loss. It was the humiliation. People I thought were friends had believed her version of the story. They'd whispered that I was bitter, unstable, clinging to a marriage that was already dead. For a while, I hated them for it. But in the quiet that followed, I realized their opinions didn't matter. The truth had spoken in the only place that counted. And in the end, I didn't need everyone to believe me. I just needed to know I hadn't let myself be erased. Life after the divorce was messy. I rented a small apartment, cheap enough to cover while I got back on my feet. It wasn't much, thin walls, creaky pipes, but it was mine. No one could push me out. No one could write my name off a deed. It was a far cry from the life I once envisioned, but it was a start. In the months that followed, I learned things about myself I never would have discovered if she hadn't tried to break me. I learned how resilient I was, how much strength hides in a person when they're pushed to the edge. I learned that being discarded doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're free to decide your own value. I won't pretend I don't still feel bitterness sometimes. Betrayal that deep leaves scars. But I don't live in that bitterness anymore. Instead, I live with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she didn't win. She tried to erase me, to reduce me to nothing, but the court, the law, and life itself refused to let her succeed. When people ask me now what happened, I don't go into details. I just say, she got her millions. I got my freedom. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Because in the end, money comes and goes. But dignity, once you fight for it and win it back, is priceless. Looking back, I realize this story isn't just about money or legal battles. It's about what happens when someone you trusted most decides you're disposable, and what it takes to remind yourself that you're not. For a long time, I thought I'd lost everything. But in fighting back, I discovered something I'd almost forgotten: my own worth. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe not with divorce papers or millions of dollars, but with someone who made you feel small, insignificant, like you didn't matter. And maybe you reached that same breaking point, the one where you either disappear quietly or stand up and say, "Not this time." If you've ever felt erased, I hope my story shows that it's possible to rebuild, that no matter how hard someone tries to write you out, you still hold the pen. And if this story resonated with you, consider sticking around. Subscribe, leave a comment, share your thoughts. Because these stories aren't just mine, they belong to anyone who's ever fought to be seen.